Monarchy will be shifting in a slightly different direction.
I think it's safe to say that change is...
The corridor outside Prince George's room was supposed to be one of the safest places in Britain. Yet shortly before dawn, a small electronic device was discovered beneath a decorative table, only steps from his door. It carried no palace marking, appeared on no security register, and had been positioned with deliberate precision. When Prince William saw where it had been found, his expression hardened. This was no ordinary breach. Someone had entered his son's private world. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At 5:42 that morning, a protection officer spotted the black device tucked beneath the table's lower edge. The officer froze, called for backup, and stopped anyone from approaching. A protection officer is a trained guard responsible for shielding royal family members from direct threats. Within minutes, the family wing was locked down, doors were sealed, and staff who had entered during the previous 48 hours were ordered to remain inside Windsor. William arrived before the device had been removed. He stood over it in silence, then turned toward George's closed door. The prince was not thinking about succession, reputation, or palace embarrassment. He was thinking about his son sleeping only steps away, while a hidden microphone may have captured every sound. That fear quickly hardened into anger. Catherine kept George at breakfast and forced calm into every word. She asked about school, poured his drink, and avoided looking toward the corridor. The young prince sensed the tension anyway. When he asked why so many guards were outside his room, she paused too long. George noticed. So did she. The placement made the discovery worse. Only approved household staff, senior aides, close relatives, and a limited security team could enter that part of the residence. No lock had been broken. No window had been forced. No security seal had been damaged. Whoever placed the device had trusted access or received help from someone who did. One aide quietly suggested moving the investigation elsewhere before George became frightened. William refused. He ordered every senior official connected to the corridor into an emergency briefing, meaning an urgent closed meeting called when immediate decisions are required. He also demanded that the device remain untouched until he saw its exact position. Then the final detail reached him. Technicians confirmed that the recorder was active during a private conversation between Catherine and George the previous evening. Someone had already captured the future king's voice. William entered the locked room ready to confront the people around the table, but first he had to decide which familiar face he could still trust. Inside the palace, the device immediately became more than a security problem. For William, it was an attack on the fragile boundary between royal duty and family life. For Catherine, it confirmed a fear she had carried quietly for years, that George's destiny could make an ordinary childhood impossible. And for the young prince himself, the sudden silence surrounding him became its own warning. Everyone was protecting him, yet nobody was willing to explain what danger had entered his home. George was not simply a child living behind guarded doors. He stood directly behind his father in the line of succession, the formal order deciding who inherits the throne. That position gave weight to everything around him, his lessons, his friendships, his private fears. Even the words he spoke when he believed nobody else was listening. Someone inside the palace had understood that vulnerability and had used it. William entered the emergency meeting carrying that knowledge like a wound. Around the table sat his private secretary, the household operations director, the family wing coordinator, two senior security officials, and a communications advisor recently granted temporary access near George's corridor. Every one of them had been trusted. Now every one of them had become a question. Before the questioning began, Catherine pulled William into a smaller room and closed the door. She placed both hands firmly on the table and told him George could not be made to feel like a prisoner because adults had failed him. The princess spoke with controlled force, but beneath it lay fear. She had spent years trying to give her children stability inside a life built around scrutiny. William answered more sharply than she expected. He said his first duty was no longer to preserve anyone's comfort or reputation. Then Catherine noticed his hands trembling. His anger was not only directed at the officials waiting outside, it was directed inward. He believed he should have seen the danger sooner. Inside the meeting, the first answers collapsed almost immediately. One official insisted the corridor had been closed for routine maintenance. Another produced a schedule showing 3 unexplained entries during the same period. A security officer denied approving any work near the family rooms. The aides began interrupting one another, each correction sounding less like clarification and more like self-protection. Then George quietly changed the investigation. After breakfast, he told Catherine that he had seen a palace employee near the decorative table the previous afternoon. The person had pretended to adjust a lamp, then moved away quickly when the young prince appeared. George could not remember the face clearly, but he remembered the silver-edged folder in the person's hand, the kind used only in senior household briefings. The mystery was no longer whether an outsider had entered, it was which trusted insider had stood close enough to George to act without raising suspicion. The device did not appear without a reason. 3 weeks earlier, a private rehearsal had taken place inside Windsor, an event so sensitive that phones were surrendered, doors were guarded, and attendance was restricted to a handful of senior figures. George had been asked to practice his role in a future constitutional ceremony. During that rehearsal, he said something innocent but deeply consequential. Several adults heard him. One of them understood that the child had revealed far more than anyone intended. George had already begun attending discreet constitutional lessons designed to prepare him slowly for the burden ahead. These sessions explained the duties attached to the crown, the institution led by the monarch and passed through the line of succession. William wanted the lessons to feel calm and age-appropriate. Catherine wanted her son to understand responsibility without allowing that responsibility to swallow his childhood. The turning point came during a closed succession rehearsal in the Windsor Library. William, Catherine, George, 2 constitutional advisors, and 4 senior palace aides were present. A succession rehearsal was a private exercise used to prepare senior royals for future duties, ceremonies, and moments of constitutional change. Nobody expected a child's answer to expose the tensions already running beneath the palace surface. One advisor asked George what kind of king he hoped to become. The young prince looked down at the prepared notes, hesitated, and then pushed them aside. He said he wanted to protect his family from people who treated the crown as more important than the human beings wearing it. William lowered his papers and stared at his son. The prince heard his own private frustration inside those words, the same frustration he had shared with Catherine during difficult years of pressure, control, and palace interference. She reached for George's hand, proud that he had spoken honestly, yet deeply aware that the room had suddenly become still. One senior official broke that silence with a dangerous question. He asked whether George had heard his father criticize the current palace structure. William closed the briefing folder immediately. He ended the rehearsal and told everyone present that his son's words were private family reflections, not material for internal assessment or political interpretation. 2 days later, that boundary was broken. A confidential summary appeared inside an internal memorandum that neither William nor Catherine had approved. An internal memorandum was a restricted written note circulated among senior officials. The language softened George's statement, but its meaning remained unmistakable. Someone had recorded the moment in writing and passed it deeper into the household. Investigators now understood the purpose behind the device outside George's room. Someone wanted more than gossip. They wanted evidence of William's private influence over the future king, and George had become the most vulnerable path to obtaining it. Armed with that connection, William returned to the aides not as a worried prince, but as a father prepared to force the truth into the open. The aides expected a formal inquiry. William gave them something far more personal. He entered the room carrying the sealed evidence bag, placed it in the center of the table, and remained standing. No prepared statement followed. No lawyer spoke for him. The prince looked directly at each official and asked one question. "Which one of you put this outside my son's room?" In that instant, protocol disappeared, and every silence became an accusation. William ordered the senior aides to remain seated without assistants, phones, or written notes. Guards stood beyond the locked doors, while the device rested inside a transparent bag between the future king and the people he had once trusted. An evidence bag is a sealed container used to protect an object from damage, interference, or contamination during an investigation. Nobody reached toward it. Nobody dared. A senior security officer broke the silence first. He confirmed that the transmitter had operated through an internal palace frequency, once assigned to temporary communications equipment. That detail changed the meaning of the breach. The person responsible had not guessed their way through Windsor's systems. They understood them. The household operations director tried to offer another explanation. He suggested the device might have been misplaced during maintenance, and later pushed beneath the table by accident. William struck his palm against the table. The sound ended the excuse before it could grow. He said equipment did not accidentally conceal itself outside a child's bedroom. It did not activate during a private conversation. And it did not disappear from every official record unless someone wanted it hidden. Sir Matthew Vale shifted in his chair. The longtime courtier had served the prince for more than a decade and had stood beside him through family crises, public pressure, and private grief. Now he looked shaken. Vale insisted he would never endanger George, yet he could not meet William's eyes. That refusal carried more weight than his denial. Investigators then revealed the detail that broke his resistance. The electronic door log had been manually disabled for 11 minutes on the afternoon George saw someone near the table. An electronic door log is the secure record showing who entered a restricted area and when. The override code had come from a senior office, not from maintenance. Vale lowered his head. He admitted authorizing corridor access for a communications technician. He claimed the instruction had arrived sealed and carried the authority of the Royal Household Secretariat, the senior administrative office responsible for coordinating sensitive palace operations. William demanded the original order. Vale answered in a near whisper. It had vanished from the secure archive. The first weak link had finally broken, but the missing instruction pointed beyond one frightened aide. Someone powerful had begun erasing the trail, and exposing that person could tear through the heart of the monarchy. Every royal household has an office that appears invisible until a crisis begins. It controls schedules, access, records, and the flow of information between family members. The missing instruction had passed through that machinery. Suddenly, William was no longer confronting one aide or one reckless decision. He was confronting a culture built to protect the institution from scandal, even when that protection required withholding the truth from the people most directly harmed by it. The Royal Household Secretariat sat at the center of that hidden system. It was the senior administrative office responsible for sensitive communications, restricted access lists, internal archives, and emergency procedures. Its officials could open doors without appearing on ordinary schedules, move staff through secure areas, and bury decisions beneath layers of formal authority. Charles received the preliminary file in his private study. The king read the first page, removed his glasses, and placed the document on the desk without speaking. His secretary waited for anger, but the silence was worse. It carried the weight of a man realizing that the machinery he had trusted may have been turned against his own grandson. William arrived with no patience left for caution. The prince demanded permission to suspend every official connected to the missing order. He argued that anyone who had touched the authorization, approved access, or erased records had forfeited the right to remain inside the household. Charles resisted. The monarch warned that mass suspensions could paralyze palace operations and draw public attention directly toward George. He believed that protecting the child also meant controlling the scale of the crisis. William heard something else. He heard the institution asking for time while his son carried the consequences. That disagreement cut deeper because both men believed they were acting out of love. Charles had relied on the Secretariat through illness, family conflict, and moments of constitutional strain. Its officials had preserved order when the monarchy appeared fragile. Now the king faced the possibility that their loyalty to the crown had become more powerful than their loyalty to the family. Then the recovered fragments arrived. A forensic review uncovered phrases from the deleted authorization, continuity assessment, and unfiltered heir-family dialogue. A continuity assessment was an internal review intended to identify risks to the monarchy's future stability. But these words suggested something far more disturbing. The device had been placed to measure William's influence over George. 3 senior officials had privately approved the operation. They had convinced themselves that monitoring the future king was an act of protection. 2 names were identified. The third approval carried only the initials RC. William understood at once. Whoever stood behind those letters possessed enough power to make misconduct look like policy. To protect George, he would have to expose not only the person responsible, but the belief that a child's life belonged to the crown before it belonged to his family. By evening, the palace no longer felt secure. Offices were sealed. Staff passes stopped working. Senior courtiers who had served for decades found guards waiting outside their doors. Yet the deepest damage could not be contained by locks or suspensions. George had learned that something had been hidden near his room. Catherine had stopped trusting the household around her children, and William had begun removing his family from a system he was one day expected to lead. William acted before anyone could slow him down. He suspended Sir Matthew Vale and 2 Secretariat officials while the investigation continued. Their secure devices were seized, their offices were locked, and their access to every royal residence was revoked. A suspension meant they were removed from duty without a final judgment. But inside the palace, the message was unmistakable. Trust had collapsed. Protection officers then searched every room connected to the children. They examined George's space, Charlotte's room, Louis' room, and the family areas between them. Furniture was shifted, vents were opened, frames were checked, and electronic objects were removed for testing. Catherine watched the process with growing distress. Each search meant the threat might be larger than anyone had admitted. William knew George could no longer be protected by silence. He sat beside his son without aides, advisors, or prepared words, and explained that a recording device had been found outside his room. The young prince listened quietly. Then he asked whether he had done something wrong by speaking honestly during the rehearsal. The question broke something inside his father. William knelt in front of him and said the failure belonged entirely to the adults. George had done nothing wrong. He had trusted the people around him, and they had abused that trust. But when the child asked whether people would always listen because he might become king, the prince hesitated. He could promise protection. He could not promise freedom from every future intrusion. Then, officers found the second sign. Behind a panel in the family sitting room, they discovered an empty adhesive mount. Whatever had once been attached there had been removed recently. An adhesive mount is a concealed fixing used to hold a small device securely in place. The discovery suggested that the surveillance may have begun before the recorder appeared outside George's door. Catherine made her decision immediately. She suspended the children's schedules and ordered their temporary move to a private property beyond the main household structure. The princess packed George's school materials herself and refused help from palace staff. As the family prepared to leave, Charles sent William a handwritten message asking him to come alone. No secretaries, no guards inside, no official record. The investigation had divided the palace, but that private meeting would decide whether the crisis destroyed their trust or finally forced the crown to change. There were no officials between them when William entered the king's private sitting room. Charles stood near the fireplace holding the recovered authorization file. But he did not begin as a monarch. He began as a grandfather. He admitted that the institution had crossed a boundary it had no right to cross, and that his instinct to contain the scandal had wounded his son further. For the first time since the device was found, William's anger gave way to something more difficult: grief. Charles dismissed the last member of staff and closed the door himself. The king then placed the file between them and sat opposite his son without opening it. No secretary would soften their words. No advisor would turn pain into policy. For once, the monarchy had no shield inside that room. The monarch admitted that senior officials had long been encouraged to identify threats to continuity before those threats became public crises. Continuity meant preserving the crown's stability through changes of reign, illness, scandal, or family conflict. Over time, that mission had created something dangerous. Some courtiers had begun treating private conversations as property belonging to the institution. William listened until his father finished. Then the prince told him what George had asked, whether becoming king meant losing the right to speak freely. His voice tightened. No child, he said, should carry that fear because adults were obsessed with controlling the future. Charles looked down at the unopened file. The king confessed that he had known the same kind of intrusion as a young heir. His friendships had been judged, his private opinions recorded, and his emotions treated as possible risks. He had survived by accepting that pressure as unavoidable. But hearing that George now felt the same fear forced him to face a painful truth. Endurance was not protection. Silence was not strength. Then Charles opened the file. The initials RC did not identify one hidden official. They stood for the Review Council, an unofficial group of senior courtiers who had acted collectively so that no single person would carry responsibility. A Review Council was a private committee formed to assess risks and advise palace leadership. This one had operated without lawful authority and hidden its actions behind shared approval. The monarch picked up his pen and signed an immediate order dissolving the group. Its authority ended that moment. He also ruled that no surveillance involving royal family members could ever be approved outside lawful security procedures. Charles handed the signed order to William. and asked him to lead the restructuring of family protection. The crisis would not be buried. For the first time, father and son stood on the same side, ready to place George's dignity above the palace's reputation. The palace statement was released at 9 o'clock the following morning, but it was not the carefully measured language that captured the country. It was one photograph: William leaving Windsor with his hand resting firmly on George's shoulder, while the young prince looked straight ahead. The image appeared within minutes on television screens, phones, and newspaper websites across Britain. A private violation had become a public reckoning, and the nation saw not an heir but a father protecting his son. Buckingham Palace confirmed that an unauthorized listening device had been discovered near the private room of a minor member of the royal family. The statement also announced that several senior household officials had been removed from duty. Buckingham Palace is both a royal residence and the central office through which major announcements concerning the monarchy are released. This time, its language was formal, but the damage behind it was deeply personal. The response went further than many expected. Charles approved the dissolution of the Review Council, an independent security investigation, and new rules separating lawful protection work from the monitoring of private family conversations. The king understood that anything less would look like concealment. William understood that the truth had already escaped the palace walls. Reporters shouted questions as the prince reached Windsor's gate. They asked what George had heard, how frightened he was, and whether the family still trusted palace security. William stopped briefly, but he refused to expose his son's emotions for public consumption. He said only that children must never be treated as instruments of institutional intelligence. That sentence changed the national debate. Parents across Britain responded less to the royal scandal than to the violation of childhood. Messages appeared outside Windsor supporting George and praising Catherine for removing the children from the household, while the inquiry continued. The princess had acted from fear, but many saw strength in her refusal to place tradition above safety. The following morning, a fictional national newspaper carried the full-width headline, "Heir Under Watch." Beneath the photograph of William's hand on George's shoulder appeared one devastating line: "A palace built to protect him became the place that listened." Then a retired courtier broke his silence during a recorded television interview. He confirmed that the Review Council had operated for years without formal constitutional oversight, meaning it lacked clear legal authority or independent supervision. His admission transformed the crisis from one reckless act into evidence of a deeply rooted culture. When the first findings were accepted, William prepared to take George back to Windsor on new terms. The public had judged the breach, but its final meaning would be decided in the corridor where the betrayal began. 1 week later, George returned to Windsor. The corridor had been cleared, the decorative table removed, and every security system replaced. Yet William did not allow officers or officials to accompany them for the final walk to the bedroom door. Father and son crossed the corridor alone. At the exact place where the device had been found, George paused. William did not rush him. The palace waited in silence while a child decided whether he could feel safe in his own home again. George stood beside the empty space and spoke. He said he no longer wanted special lessons held behind locked doors. Constitutional education meant the preparation given to a future monarch. The young prince wanted those lessons to include people he trusted and questions he could answer honestly. William listened without interrupting. The prince then promised that becoming king one day would bring responsibilities, but it would never give the palace ownership of his thoughts, fears, or conversations. He told his son that duty without trust became control, and control disguised as protection had caused the entire crisis. The inquiry delivered its verdict. Members of the Review Council had authorized the recording device to capture conversations about George's education and William's influence over him. The council was an unofficial group of senior courtiers who had operated without proper legal oversight. 3 officials were dismissed permanently, while Sir Matthew Vale resigned, through a documented statement admitting that he had followed an order he knew was wrong. Every unauthorized recording was destroyed under independent supervision. Charles answered the failure with reform. The king approved the Royal Family Privacy Charter, a binding set of rules protecting private apartments, children's communications, educational discussions, and sensitive family matters. Catherine's earlier decision to remove the children proved that protecting them mattered more than preserving appearances. George opened his bedroom door, stepped inside, and turned back toward his father. William remained in the corridor until the young prince smiled and closed the door himself. That small gesture carried the final meaning of the crisis. The room belonged to George again. The palace had confused service with control and continuity with entitlement. William's confrontation proved that the monarchy could not protect its future by violating the child who represented that future. Charles chose reform. Catherine chose her children. And the future king showed that his defining duty would begin not with the crown, but with fatherhood. The device was gone, the officials were gone, and the silence finally belonged to the family whose privacy had been returned. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.